Albert Einstein reportedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. Now, it's a mathematical certainty that if you save consistently year after year, your wealth will eventually shoot upwards in a vertical climb. See, unlike simple interest systems, which just grow at a steady, predictable pace, compound interest operates exponentially. This means that even modest contributions can lead to substantial gains, simply because the money you earn begins to earn its own money. But here's the thing. A strange paradox exists. While the math suggests that anyone with enough patience can grow their account balance significantly, very few people actually cross that threshold into becoming millionaires. Today, we're going to dismantle this mathematical engine and explore why the real world often breaks the formula. Think of a small, fragile sphere of packed ice. This is the classic image used to describe compound interest. A snowball rolling down a mountain. At first, the movement is glacial. The sphere is tiny. But as it descends, the snowball effect takes hold. It picks up more snow with every rotation, and because the surface area has expanded, it gathers even more snow on the next turn. This is exactly how a principal amount evolves. The interest earned grows each year, merging into a new total that generates its own profit. On paper, it looks like an unstoppable force of nature. But, and this is the part people forget, there is a dark side to this momentum. Just as a massive boulder of ice can be obliterated by a sudden heat wave, the same mathematical force that builds wealth can be wiped out by a few wrong variables. To understand why, we need to look at the actual machinery under the hood. To really grasp the mechanics, we first have to distinguish between simple and compound interest. Simple interest is essentially a flat line. It only pays you based on your original deposit. Compound interest, by contrast, is a curve that bends sharply upward. Let's look at a clear example. If an investment of $1,000 earns 10% interest per year, the first year's interest is $100, leaving you with a total of $1,100. At this stage, the growth feels linear. It feels slow. But in the second year, that 10% return is calculated on $1,100, not $1,000. The interest earned is now $110, bringing the total to $1,210. That extra $10, that's the catalyst. It's interest earned on previous interest. This is the precise moment the flat line transforms into an exponential curve. Your money is no longer just growing, it is accelerating. The original principle is no longer the sole driver of wealth. The interest itself begins to do the heavy lifting. Once this cycle repeats over decades, the growth ceases to be a steady climb and becomes an avalanche. For those who want a mental shortcut to visualize this, there's a mathematical cheat code known as the Rule of 72. It's a simple way to calculate how long it takes for your money to double. You just divide 72 by your annual interest rate. For instance, if you earn a 7% return, your money will double roughly every 10.3 years. To see this in action, let's look at a concrete scenario. If you invest $10,000 in an S&P 500 index fund with a 7% average yearly return, you aren't seeing a flat increase. After 5 years, that initial sum grows to $14,176. This means you've earned $4,176 over 5 years without performing a single hour of additional labor. The math is steady, but the momentum is building. This is where the Rule of 72 becomes a strategic tool. It identifies the exact moment the peak of the curve starts to climb steeply, moving from a slow crawl to a full-on sprint. One millionaire once offered a piece of advice that sounds almost counterintuitive. Instead of stressing over how to earn millions, you should focus entirely on reaching the first 100,000. The reasoning is simple. Once you hit that first 100K, your net worth begins to grow with a velocity that feels fundamentally different. Let's look at the numbers to see why the start is such a brutal slog. If you invest $10,000 annually with a 7% average yearly return, going from 0 to 100,000 takes 7.84 years. It is a long, exhausting climb where your own manual contributions are doing almost all the heavy lifting. But then, something shifts. To go from 100,000 to 200,000 with those same parameters, the same 10K annual investment and 7% return, it takes only 5.1 years. This means the second 100,000 is acquired 2.74 years faster than the first. In other words, making the second 100 grand is roughly 35% faster than making the first. This is the tipping point where the interest starts to compete with your deposits. And the acceleration doesn't stop there. Moving from 200,000 to 300,000 takes 3.78 years. The jump from 300,000 to 400,000 takes 3 years. And the leap from 400,000 to 500,000 takes just 2.5 years. To put this in perspective, if you managed to get 100,000 into an S&P 500 index fund and never invested another cent again, you would still become a millionaire within 33 years. The math is inevitable. But while this growth looks certain on a spreadsheet, there is a hidden reverse gear in the human life cycle that most financial advisors conveniently ignore. Consider the starting line. Gen Z currently has approximately 86% less buying power than baby boomers did at the same age. That is a staggering gap, essentially a different economic universe. When you compare the same age bracket across generations, the disparity in starting capital is nearly absolute. This is why the to-the-moon narratives on social media are so seductive. They promise a shortcut to that critical 100K milestone. But the reality is that higher paid entry positions are harder to secure because older generations are staying in the workforce longer. The corporate ladder is essentially blocked. However, a new variable has entered the equation: the internet. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok allow younger people to generate income in ways that older generations simply don't understand. It creates a strange paradox where the only viable path to early compounding growth is often an online side hustle, rather than a traditional corporate climb. Mathematics is a perfect system, but human lives are chaotic. This is where the theory of compound interest often fails due to the life cycle of savings. If we look at the timeline, many people study until age 21 and retire around age 60 or 65. That leaves a 45-year window of earning. On a spreadsheet, that looks like a straight line of growth. In reality, it is a series of violent interruptions. During the student years and early adulthood, compounding often works in reverse. Instead of adding to the pile, people are paying for university or basic living costs, draining the principal before the snowball ever gains momentum. Then the middle years hit. For many, the rising costs of existence, specifically rents, energy, and food, consume every cent of the paycheck. They are left with nothing to save, which effectively kills the engine of compound interest before it can even ignite. Even for those who successfully build a mountain of wealth, there is a final, steep drop. Elderly individuals often face astronomical costs for long-term care and end-of-life medical expenses, which can deplete a lifetime of accumulated wealth in a matter of months. I saw this firsthand with my own grandparents. They owned property and had a stable life, but they passed away with almost nothing because the costs of their final years consumed everything. The math promised an infinite curve upward, but standard biological life cycle pulled it back down to zero. Economists use a theoretical model called the desert island economy to illustrate how compounding returns work in society. In this model, building a farm in the first year provides more food in the second year, which allows time to build better tools and a sturdier house. This is the societal version of the snowball effect. Improving your productive capacity over time creates compounding returns for the whole community. However, this mathematical beauty exists within a physical world. Societies with physical limits cannot grow in a compounding way forever. Once the land is fully claimed and the tools are maximized, the exponential curve hits a wall. Look at the actual numbers. In the US, economic growth is approximately 3%. In the UK, the economy's growth has dropped to approximately 1% because most of the land is already owned and utilized. Here's the paradox. While national economies slow down, the wealth of the ultra-rich grows at a rate of approximately 4 to 5% per year. If the total pie is only growing at 1% or 3%, but a small group is compounding their assets at 5%, The math suggests a systemic shift. The snowball is no longer just picking up fresh snow. It is starting to take snow from other people's piles. This creates a dangerous friction. When economic growth is lower than the growth of the rich's wealth, the wealthy grow their holdings by cannibalizing the existing middle class. They aren't necessarily building new factories or inventing new technologies to create this value. Instead, they grow their wealth by acquiring existing assets, stocks, property, gold, and even classic cars or fine art. Think about what happens when the price of a home or a piece of land skyrockets. To a financial advisor, that looks like a win for the owner. But in reality, these rising asset prices are described as the dispossession of the middle class. The asset doesn't produce more value, it just becomes too expensive for the average person to ever own. We can see the end result of this process in regions where the middle class has been hollowed out. In countries with a very small middle class, such as India, Brazil, or the urban centers of Johannesburg in South Africa, the result is generally a low quality of economic life for ordinary people. The snowball has simply become too large for the rest of the hill. There is a profound irony in how we handle our future. In the Old Testament, there is a story of Esau and Jacob. Esau, driven by the hunger of the moment, trades his entire long-term inheritance for a single bowl of lentil stew. It is the ultimate example of how immediate needs can overwrite the long-term logic we use to build wealth. When we prioritize the present over the future, we are essentially trading our inheritance for a bowl of soup. This is the emotional weight of the trade-off. We aren't just spending money, we are sacrificing the exponential growth of our assets before they ever reach that critical mass. It's a hard truth. The mathematical beauty of the snowball effect is completely neutralized by the basic human instinct to survive the day. So, how do we stop this snowball from consuming everything? Some economists suggest that the only way to fix the current systemic imbalance is to fundamentally change the tax structure, taxing the super rich more and ordinary people less. It is a direct confrontation with the math of compounding. If the wealth of a few continues to grow faster than the economy itself, the system eventually hits a wall. The question remains whether the political will exists to pivot this structure before the middle class is completely hollowed out by the mathematical inevitability of the rich's growth. Compound interest is a masterpiece of mathematics, but it can be a weapon in the hands of the few. We've seen how the rule of 72 can turn a modest sum into a fortune, and how the first 100,000 is the most brutal hurdle of a lifetime. But we've also seen the friction, the 1% national growth versus the 5% growth of the elite, and the way the life cycle of spending can melt a lifetime of savings in a few months of medical care. The snowball effect is an unstoppable force, but it doesn't care who it crushes. As assets like housing and land move out of reach for the average person, we are left with a systemic imbalance that math alone cannot solve. Will we find a way to redistribute the snow, or will the snowball of the ultra-wealthy eventually leave the rest of us with nothing but a bare frozen hill?